You see, we begin with a most curious habit. We wake up in the morning and immediately begin tightening our grip on the day, as if life were a slippery bar of soap about to leap from our hands. We plan, we brace, we rehearse conversations that have not yet occurred, and we worry about outcomes that exist only as shadows in the mind. And all the while, we say to ourselves, I must get control of this. But have you ever noticed that the tighter the grip becomes, the more anxious the hand feels? The fist clenches, the knuckles whiten, and suddenly, the very thing you wish to hold begins to slip away. This, I think, is one of the great ironies of human existence. The moment you try to dominate life, to pin it down, to force it into your idea of how it ought to behave, life responds by becoming obstinate, unruly, and unpredictable. Like trying to smooth water with a flat iron, the harder you press, the more chaotic the ripples become. Now, consider how you breathe. You do not sit there all day reminding yourself in, out. If you did, you would very quickly feel exhausted, even panicked. Breathing works beautifully, precisely because it happens by itself. The same is true of your heartbeat, your digestion, your growth from child to adult. These processes unfold with an astonishing intelligence, and yet they are entirely unmanaged by your conscious will. Imagine the absurdity of attempting to micromanage them, and yet, when it comes to living, we insist on doing exactly that. We tell ourselves, I must be in control of my emotions. And so we suppress them, push them, don't pretend they are not there. But suppressed emotions are like beach balls held underwater. They do not disappear. They gather pressure, and eventually, quite spectacularly, they burst forth. The person who prides himself on being in control suddenly finds himself shouting, breaking down, or feeling an inexplicable emptiness. Life, you see, does not appreciate being bullied. There is a wonderful analogy in the art of sailing. You cannot command the wind. No amount of shouting, pleading, or planning will make it blow in the direction you prefer. The sailor who attempts to control the wind is a fool. But the sailor who understands the wind sets the sails accordingly, who works with its movement rather than against it, can travel vast distances with remarkable grace. The difference is subtle but profound. One is domination, the other is cooperation. And so it is with life. The illusion of control arises from a misunderstanding of who we think we are. We imagine ourselves as something separate from the flow of events, a little commander standing outside the universe issuing orders. This must happen, that must not. But where exactly is this commander? Is he not himself a product of the same processes he is trying to command? Your thoughts arise spontaneously. You do not choose them in advance. You discover them, rather like hearing a sound, and yet you claim ownership over them, as if you personally manufactured each one. This misunderstanding leads to a peculiar tension. We treat life as a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived. We think that if only we could figure it all out, secure the right job, the right relationship, the right future, then we could finally relax. But notice how relaxation is always postponed until some imaginary moment ahead, and that moment never arrives. The tragic joke is that life becomes uncontrollable precisely because we demand control. We refuse to trust the process, and so we are perpetually at odds with it. We are like dancers who insist on watching their feet instead of listening to the music, and in doing so, we lose the rhythm entirely. And so we come to the question, what would it mean to trust life? Not in the sentimental sense, not as blind optimism, but as a deep recognition that you are not standing outside the dance. You are the dance. When you understand this, control begins to look like a rather strange ambition. For how can the wave control the ocean? It may rise, it may fall, it may curl dramatically, and crash with great enthusiasm. But at no point is it separate from the water that gives it form. Yet the ego, that marvelous and mischievous construction, insists otherwise. The ego says, I am the doer. I am the thinker. I am the one who must manage this entire affair. And so it carries an enormous burden. It believes itself responsible for the universe, or at least for the small corner of it called my life. Is it any wonder that this ego feels anxious, tense, perpetually behind schedule? You see, the ego thrives on control because control gives it a sense of permanence. If I can fix things, predict things, dominate outcomes, then perhaps I can secure myself against uncertainty and ultimately against death. But uncertainty is not an error in the system. It is the system. Life is improvisation, not a rehearsed performance. An improvisation cannot be controlled. It can only be participated in. Think of a jazz musician. If he clings rigidly to the notes on the page, terrified of making a mistake, the music becomes lifeless. But when he lets go in, he trusts the flow of sound, the responsiveness of his own body, the conversation with other musicians, something alive happens. Mistakes turn into motifs. Accidents become expressions. Control dissolves into creativity. Now, apply this to your own life. How often do you resist what is happening because it does not match your plan? You say, "This should not be happening to me." But who exactly is life supposed to consult before it unfolds? There's a curious arrogance hidden inside the demand for control, a quiet assumption that the universe has made a clerical error by not conforming to your expectations. And yet, when you look back on your life, are the most meaningful moments the ones you planned? Rarely. Falling in love, discovering a passion, encountering loss, being transformed by failure, these events arrive unannounced. They break your plans. They disrupt your carefully constructed narratives. And still, they are the very experiences that give your life depth and texture. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. Letting go of control is not the same as giving up. It is more like the difference between floating and drowning. The drowning person flails, fights the water, exhausts himself in panic. The one who floats lies back, trusts the buoyancy of the body, and discovers that the water has been holding him all along. When you stop trying to control life, something curious happens. You begin to listen. You notice subtle signals, the feeling in your gut, the quiet intuition, the rhythm of your own energy. You act, but you are not forcing. You choose, but you are not clinging to outcomes. Action becomes responsive rather than compulsive. And this has practical consequences. Relationships soften when you stop trying to manage other people's feelings and reactions. Work becomes more engaging when you are not obsessed with future results, but attentive to the process itself. Even fear changes its character. It no longer feels like an enemy to be eliminated, but like a signal part of the natural landscape of being alive. You see, control promises safety, but delivers tension. Surrender appears risky, but reveals a deeper security. Not the security of certainty, but the security of belonging. You belong to this world in the same way a tree belongs to the forest, or a cloud belongs to the sky. It does not need to control the weather in order to exist meaningfully. And when this is truly seen, not merely understood intellectually, but felt, life becomes strangely manageable by no longer being managed at all. Now, of course, the mind immediately objects. It says, "But if I don't control my life, everything will fall apart." This is a very reasonable fear, and it deserves to be examined carefully, because what we usually mean by control is not wisdom, but anxiety disguised as responsibility. We confuse tension with care. We think that if we stop worrying, something terrible will happen, as though worry itself were a kind of cosmic glue holding the universe together. But let us look more closely. When you are walking, you do not consciously calculate every muscle movement. If you did, you would trip over your own feet. Walking happens because the body knows how to walk. In the same way, living happens because life knows how to live. The problem arises when the thinking mind attempts to take over functions it was never meant to perform. Thought is a wonderful tool, but a disastrous master. Most of our attempts at control come from fear of the future. We imagine tomorrow as a threat, a courtroom in which we will be judged, found wanting, or punished for our inadequacy. And so we prepare defenses. We rehearse. We strategize. We try to guarantee outcomes. But the future, like the horizon, recedes as you approach it. You never actually arrive there. You only ever live now. And here is the peculiar thing. Control is always aimed at a future that does not exist. You cannot control what is happening. You can only react to what you imagine might happen. Thus, control is an activity entirely divorced from reality. It is a kind of daydream, albeit a stressful one. When you are fully present, control loses its grip. You respond to what is needed, not to what you fear. You become, in a sense, spontaneous, not reckless, but alive. There is a great difference. The spontaneous person is not impulsive. He is responsive. He listens to the situation instead of imposing a script upon it. Consider again the image of dancing. If you are dancing with a partner and you insist on leading every move with force, you will step on toes and ruin the dance. But if you feel the movement, sense the balance, and allow give in, the dance becomes a conversation rather than a struggle. Life, too, is a conversation, but you cannot converse if you are shouting instructions all the time. There is also a subtle pleasure the ego takes in control, even when it causes suffering. Control gives a sense of importance. I am the one who must make this work. Letting go can feel like becoming irrelevant, like dissolving. And that is precisely why it is so frightening. The ego senses that surrender is a kind of death not of the body, but of the illusion of separateness. And yet, what actually dies is not you, but a misunderstanding. What remains is something far more resilient and intelligent than the ego ever was. When control falls away, you do not become a puppet of fate. You become an expression of the whole. Your actions arise naturally from the situation. Just as a bird's flight arises from the air, it moves through. This changes the way you relate to failure. Failure no longer feels like a personal indictment, a proof that you have lost control. It becomes information, feedback, a bend in the river rather than a wall. And success, too, loses its intoxicating grip. You enjoy it, but you do not cling to it, knowing that clinging turns pleasure into anxiety. Even suffering takes on a different quality. Pain still hurts, but it does not have to be multiplied by resistance. Much of our suffering comes not from what happens, but from our insistence that it should not have happened. When you release that insistence, pain becomes part of the texture of life, not a verdict against it. And so, gradually, almost imperceptibly, you begin to live without the constant background hum of tension. Not because you have figured everything out, but because you have stopped trying to. You begin to trust the same intelligence that grows your hair, heals your wounds, and turns a seed into a tree. Life does not need to be controlled. It needs to be allowed. And in allowing it, you discover something rather astonishing. Life is not against you. It never was. The sense that existence is a hostile force, something to be wrestled into submission, arises from a profound misunderstanding. We mistake the natural unpredictability of life for malevolence, as though the universe were deliberately trying to frustrate our plans. But the universe is not personal in that way. It is playful, it experiments, it explores itself through endless forms, including the one you presently call me. When you see this, the compulsion to control begins to soften. You realize that much of what you were fighting was not life, but your own expectations. Expectations are frozen images of how we think reality should behave. And when reality refuses to cooperate, as it always does, we feel betrayed. But betrayed by whom? By our own mental pictures. Take, for instance, the idea of security. We chase it relentlessly. Financial security, emotional security, psychological security. We want guarantees. But security, when you examine it closely, is a fantasy of permanence in a world defined by change. To demand security is to demand that the river stop flowing, and so the pursuit of security becomes a source of chronic unease. You are always guarding, always anticipating loss, always bracing for impact. Now contrast that with stability. Stability is not the absence of change, but the ability to move with it. A tightrope walker does not remain upright by becoming rigid. He remains upright by constant, subtle adjustments. His balance is dynamic, not fixed. In the same way, a life lived without the obsession of control is not chaotic, it is supple. This brings us to the matter of trust again. But now, in a deeper sense, trust is not the belief that everything will turn out the way you want. It is the understanding that whatever happens, you can meet it. Not because you are invincible, but because you are not separate from what happens. The wave does not fear crashing, because crashing is part of being a wave. When you stop trying to control life, you also stop defining yourself so narrowly. You no longer insist, this is who I must be, and this is who I must not be. You allow yourself to change, to contradict yourself, to grow in unexpected directions. Control requires a fixed identity. Letting go allows identity to be fluid. And here, many people become uneasy. But if I let go of control, they ask, won't I become irresponsible? On the contrary. True responsibility arises not from fear, but from sensitivity. When you are not preoccupied with defending your ego, you become more attentive to the consequences of your actions. You respond more accurately, more humanely. The person obsessed with control is often remarkably careless because he is not actually paying attention to what is happening, only to whether things are conforming to his plan. The person who has let go listens. He notices when something is out of balance. He adjusts. Responsibility, then, is not imposed from above. It emerges from participation. This understanding also transforms your relationship with death. Control is, at its deepest level, an attempt to deny mortality. We want to fix life so that it will not change, decay, or end. But death is not a mistake. It is the rhythm that gives life its urgency and beauty. A song that never ended would not be music. It would be noise. When you stop trying to control life, you stop treating death as an enemy. You see it as the closing of a phrase, the completion of a gesture. This does not make loss painless, but it makes it meaningful. It places grief within a larger harmony rather than isolating it as an injustice. And so, gradually, the struggle relaxes. You still act. You still choose. You still make plans, but you hold them lightly, knowing that life may rewrite them at any moment. You stop demanding that reality conform to your ideas, and instead allow your ideas to be informed by reality. This is not resignation, it is intimacy. It is meeting life at close range, without armor, without clenched fists. And in that meeting, you may find that what you were trying so desperately to control was, all along, trying to carry you. And here's where the paradox becomes beautifully clear. The less you try to control life, the more capable you become of influencing it. Influence, unlike control, is a dance, not a battle. It requires sensitivity, awareness, and timing rather than force. You do not compel the river to flow a certain way. You guide your boat skillfully through its currents. You do not force the wind. You adjust your sails. In this subtle art, life ceases to be an opponent and becomes a collaborator. Consider the way children play. They are entirely absorbed in the moment. They do not demand that the world bend to their expectations. They do not fret over the outcome of a game. And yet, they are astonishingly effective at exploring, learning, and mastering their environment. Their mastery emerges naturally from engagement, not from domination, and this is exactly how life responds to those who relinquish rigid control. It opens, expands, and invites participation. There is also the matter of beauty, which is intimately linked with unpredictability. Imagine a perfectly planned garden, every leaf and flower in precise alignment. It might appear ordered, but it lacks life. Now consider a wild forest, where growth is spontaneous, chaotic, and abundant. The beauty of the forest lies in its surrender to natural processes. The trees do not strive to make the forest beautiful. It is beautiful precisely because it is alive. Life, in the same way, reveals its richness when it is allowed to be itself, rather than forced into an artificial pattern. And what about love? Love, the ultimate lesson in surrender. You cannot control who loves you or whom you love. Attempts to manipulate affection, to secure it through strategy or calculation, inevitably produce tension and disappointment. True love arises spontaneously, freely, and profoundly, without coercion. Those who try to control love only experienced its absence. Those who allow themselves to be vulnerable discover its abundance. In this, life mirrors love. The act of letting go opens the channels for the very thing you seek. We must also consider creativity. Every artist, writer, musician, or thinker knows this truth intimately. The moment you try to force inspiration, it flees. You may labor with great effort, but the work feels stiff, lifeless, mechanical. Inspiration cannot be commanded. It can only be welcomed, observed, and acted upon when it arises. The more rigid the attempt to control, the more barren the results. But those who cultivate receptivity, those who open themselves to the flow, find that creativity becomes effortless, abundant, and astonishingly alive. And so life itself becomes a teacher of surrender. The natural world whispers its wisdom in countless forms. The river flows, the wind shifts, the tide turns. Every creature operates within the currents of existence, not by demanding dominance, but by attuning itself to circumstance. We, too, can learn this delicate skill to move with, rather than against, the flow. To understand that control is an illusion, and that trust, sensitivity, and responsiveness are far more powerful. This realization transforms our relationship with anxiety. The tension produced by the need to control stems from a fear that we are unprepared, inadequate, or at the mercy of events. But when control is released, anxiety softens. We are no longer battling a universe imagined as hostile. We are simply participating in the dance, responsive to each moment as it unfolds. Life does not demand perfection. It only asks for presence. And presence, in its quiet potency, brings clarity. Decisions that once seemed urgent become less so. Challenges reveal themselves as opportunities for learning rather than crises to dominate. Conflict, when approached without rigid expectations, allows for understanding rather than escalation. The paradox is that letting go of control does not mean chaos. It produces a more coherent, harmonious life than any effort to command could achieve. Now, let us consider the mind itself. Thoughts arise spontaneously, like clouds drifting across the sky. You cannot dictate which clouds will appear or when they will vanish. Attempting to force thoughts into alignment, to eliminate anxiety or generate only positive ideas, is like trying to herd the wind. But when you simply observe your thoughts, without attachment or judgment, a curious clarity emerges. You become aware of patterns, AIV, tendencies of insights that were previously obscured by the effort to dominate your own mind. Control, in this context, obscure. Surrender illuminates. And so, in every dimension, emotion, creativity, relationships, thought, the pattern is the same. The more you insist on control, the more rigid and anxious life becomes. The more you release, the more life flows naturally, and you discover a profound intelligence guiding your existence. A current beneath the surface that knows precisely where to take you, if only you allow yourself to be carried.